Before time existed, before light touched darkness, there was only emptiness stretching infinitely in every direction. Within that nothingness floated a single egg, drifting through the void with patient silence. When that egg finally hatched, the universe itself spilled forth, bringing matter and energy and the first whisper of creation. From this primordial moment emerged Arceus, a being of pure cosmic power whose 1,000 arms shaped reality itself. In the regions that would one day hold mountains and oceans, in the spaces where trainers would walk and Pokémon would roam, nothing yet existed except potential and the quiet promise of what might be. Before we drift any further, make sure to subscribe so once we reach 1,000 subs, I can reduce the ads, and tell me where you're watching from tonight. Arceus moved through the formless void with purpose that transcended understanding. Using the 1,000 arms that ancient texts describe, this first being crafted 3 entities to give structure to existence itself. Dialga emerged first, embodying time and allowing moments to flow in sequence rather than chaos. Palkia followed, shaping space so that distance and dimension could have meaning. Then came Giratina, representing antimatter and the shadow reflection of all things created. These 3 cosmic beings formed the foundation of everything that would follow, their powers so fundamental that the universe could not function without them. But Giratina's nature proved too chaotic for the delicate balance Arceus had envisioned. Its violent tendencies threatened to unravel the careful order being established. So Arceus made a decision that would echo through millennia, banishing Giratina to a place called the Distortion World. This realm existed as a mirror to the universe, a twisted reflection where gravity bent differently and reality followed stranger rules. There, Giratina would remain, watching the world it helped create from behind a veil of separation. Arceus was not finished shaping existence. 3 more beings came into form, smaller than the cosmic titans, but no less essential. Uxie brought knowledge, the ability to learn and remember and understand. Mesprit carried emotion, allowing joy and sorrow and love to color experience. Azelf embodied willpower, granting determination and choice to all who would one day live. These 3 late guardians, as they would become known, represented the internal forces that would define consciousness itself. They were gifts Arceus placed within the framework of reality, waiting for life to discover them. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we begin to see how creation moved from abstract forces to tangible form. Long after the universe took shape, after the earth cooled and land masses formed, super ancient Pokémon emerged with power that rivaled the first beings. In a region that would eventually be called Hoenn, 2 titans clashed with primal fury. Groudon rose from the planet's molten core, expanding continents and raising mountains with each thunderous step. Kyogre surged from the deepest trenches, shaping oceans and carving shorelines with waves that dwarfed any storm. These 2 forces met in ancient Hoenn and became locked in endless rivalry. Neither could claim dominance, neither would yield. The land expanded as the sea fought back, and the sea swallowed territories as new land rose to replace it. The conflict seemed destined to continue forever, reshaping the region again and again with no resolution. But high above the clouds, a third being watched this struggle unfold. Rayquaza descended from the heavens, a serpent of sky who possessed authority over both earth and ocean. Its presence alone commanded respect from the warring titans. Rayquaza's intervention brought stillness to the chaos. Groudon and Kyogre, exhausted from their eternal battle, retreated deep into the earth to sleep and recover from wounds that had accumulated over countless years. Rayquaza remained in the upper atmosphere, guarding the planet from threats beyond, while ensuring the sleeping titans would not wake prematurely. The sky-high Pokémon became protector of the world below, watching asteroids approach and destroying them before they could bring catastrophe. In the wake of this great battle, another ancient being began shaping the continents. Regigigas moved across the earth with slow, deliberate power, pulling land masses into new positions and raising mountain ranges that would define regions for millions of years. Mount Coronet in what would become the Hisui region rose under its careful construction, but Regigigas did not work alone. It created 5 golems in its own image, each embodying a different fundamental element. Regis formed from eternal frost. Regirock took shape from compressed stone. Registeel was forged from unbreakable metal. Regieleki crackled with pure electricity. Regidrago contained the essence of dragon energy itself. Another quiet detail appears when we look closer at the artifacts Arceus created during this primordial age. 3 orbs came into existence, each linked to one of the cosmic beings who shaped the universe. The adamant orb connected to Dialga, pulsing with temporal energy. The lustrous orb held Palkia's spatial power. The Griseous orb carried Giratina's antimatter essence. Their purpose remained unclear, but these crystalline objects would eventually allow the summoning of their associated beings in true forms. Dialga and Palkia assumed fleeting, diminished shapes as they watched over time and space, while Giratina remained imprisoned in the distortion world, unable to affect the reality it helped create. Then Arceus created something different from cosmic forces and elemental titans. A small, pink being came into existence, carrying within it the genetic blueprint for all Pokémon that would ever exist. Mew appeared in the world as the ancestor, the original template from which diversity would bloom. Scientists in future ages would hypothesize that every Pokémon species descended from Mew in some way, their forms variations on this single ancestral design. But Mew remained rare even in those early days, drifting through ancient forests with playful innocence. Seeing creation complete, Arceus withdrew from the world it had shaped. The great being disappeared from common view, leaving its creations to develop without constant intervention. Time flowed forward as Dialga allowed, space expanded as Palkia decreed, and life began the slow process of becoming complex and varied. Around 300 million years before the modern era, the Mew population slowly decreased through natural processes. New species emerged from Mew's genetic template, adapting to specific environments and developing specialized forms. Aerodactyls soared through ancient skies on leathery wings. Relicanth swam in primordial oceans, unchanged by the passage of eons. Kabutops scuttled along prehistoric shores, hunting with razor-sharp scythes. These were Earth's first Pokémon beyond Mew itself, and they roamed a world that knew nothing of human civilization. Not much happened during these vast stretches of time. The planet developed ecosystems as species emerged and went extinct in natural cycles. Continents drifted across the globe. Mountains eroded grain by grain, while new peaks rose from tectonic pressure. It was an age of patience, of slow transformation that required millions of years to notice. Life persisted and adapted, but consciousness had not yet awakened to ask questions about its own existence. Around 2 million years ago, something profound occurred in what would eventually become the Paldea region. A great crater formed in the earth, so massive that its walls reached toward the sky like the rim of some cosmic bowl. This was Area Zero, and its creation came from forces that remain mysterious even now. The impact or event that carved this crater released energies that affected everything nearby. Terrestrial energy began emanating from deep within the earth, a crystalline power that could transform the very nature of Pokémon who encountered it. The crater's formation proved catastrophic for one species in particular. Terrapagos, ancient beings who lived in that region, faced near extinction as their habitat was violently reshaped. Almost all members of the species perished in the cataclysm. Only one survived, and its survival came through desperate transformation. This single Terrapagos turned its body into pure crystal, entering a dormant state that would last for millions of years. Sealed in mineral sleep, it waited beneath the earth while ages passed overhead. 1 million years after Area Zero's creation, evolution continued its patient work. Species diversified further, adapting to every climate and terrain the planet offered. Forests grew thick with bug and grass types. Oceans teemed with water Pokémon of countless forms. Mountains became home to rock and ice types who could endure harsh altitude. The world was becoming rich with variation, though still unpopulated by humans who might appreciate this diversity. 20,000 years ago, a meteor struck the region that would one day be called Galar. This was no ordinary asteroid, for it carried within it a passenger of great significance. Eternatus, a being from beyond Earth, resided in that meteor and remained dormant after impact. The cosmic Pokémon lay sleeping beneath Galar's soil, its presence unknown to the few scattered human tribes beginning to emerge in distant lands. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we see humanity starting to appear in the world's narrative. 10,000 years ago, humans had developed enough to worship and fear the legendary beings they encountered. The Regigigas, and its 5 golem creations had been venerated by early human civilizations for thousands of years. But something changed during this period. The humans who had once worshipped these titans began to fear their power instead. Perhaps the Regis became too destructive in their movements. Perhaps human civilization had grown enough to see them as threats rather than gods. Whatever the reason, the Regis were sealed away across multiple regions. Humans developed methods to lock these powerful beings in hidden chambers, placing them in locations where they could not accidentally destroy settlements or alter geography in ways that endangered human life. The sealing was not malicious, but cautious, born from the desire to coexist with forces that could reshape continents without meaning harm. Many years before the events that would be recorded in Pokémon Legends Arceus, an unknown hero traveled through ancient Hisui. This legendary figure befriended several Pokémon as they journeyed, collecting all of Arceus's sacred plates scattered across the land. These plates represented different elemental forces, each one containing a fragment of the power Arceus had used to shape reality. The hero's bond with Pokémon grew so strong that they eventually faced Arceus itself in battle, a confrontation that should have been impossible for any mortal being. Yet the hero succeeded. They defeated Arceus through strength of will and the bonds they had formed. Rather than being angered, Arceus was impressed by this display of determination and unity. The great being granted the descendants of the hero's Pokémon special powers as a reward. These blessed Pokémon would become known as the noble Pokémon, revered by humans in Hisui for generations to come. They served as guardians and guides, their enhanced abilities marking them as different from ordinary members of their species. A few thousand years before the time of Legends Arceus, a people called the Celestica tribe migrated from Johto to Hisui. They came from Sinjo, a region where the influence of Arceus was particularly strong, and brought their culture with them across dangerous terrain. The Celestica people established the Celestica Trail, carved the Celestica ruins into mountainsides, and constructed the Temple of Sinnoh as a place of worship. They revered 3 mighty beings of creation, Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, along with Arceus, whom they called the Almighty Sinnoh. Their faith shaped Hisui's early spiritual landscape. In the distant Kalos region, tragedy struck during a terrible conflict known simply as the Kalos War. Thousands of Pokémon and people died in fighting that consumed the region for years. A king named AZ lost his beloved companion, Floette, during the chaos. Grief consumed him, and in his desperation to undo death, he created something unprecedented. Using infinity energy, a power derived from Pokémon life force itself, AZ built a machine capable of resurrection. The device worked, bringing Floette back from death and granting both Pokémon and King eternal life in the process. But AZ's grief had not been satisfied by Floette's return. The war continued, and his rage at the senseless killing grew until it overwhelmed his judgment. He transformed the resurrection machine into a weapon of mass destruction. When activated, it killed countless Pokémon and people across Kalos, draining their life energy to amplify its power. The devastation was complete. The war ended because there were too few survivors left to continue fighting. Floette was horrified by what AZ had done in the name of ending conflict. The Pokémon, who had been granted eternal life by his love, now saw only the terrible cost of that gift. Floette fled from AZ, unable to remain with someone who had caused such suffering even in pursuit of peace. The king found himself burdened with immortality he no longer wanted, condemned to wander the world in search of the companion he had saved and lost. He would spend the next 3,000 years searching for Floette or trying to atone for the massacre he had caused. AZ's brother, witnessing the weapon's horrifying power, made sure it could never be used again. He buried the machine in a secret location where it would remain hidden from those who might be tempted to resurrect it for their own purposes. The device would sleep beneath the earth for millennia, waiting to be discovered by people who had forgotten the lesson of AZ's sorrow. Around the same time in Galar, disaster struck in an event that would be remembered as the Darkest Day. Eternatus, which had lain dormant beneath the region for 20,000 years, finally awakened. It released massive amounts of energy that flooded across Galar, causing wild Pokémon to Dynamax and Gigantamax against their will. These transformed Pokémon grew to enormous size, their power amplified to dangerous levels. The region descended into chaos as giant Pokémon rampaged without control. Two unnamed heroes rose to face this catastrophe. They were accompanied by Zacian and Zamazenta, legendary wolves who possessed the power to stand against Eternatus. Together, these four beings fought the cosmic threat and succeeded in defeating it, forcing Eternatus back into dormancy. But their victory was lost to history through some quirk of record-keeping or deliberate erasure. Despite saving Galar from destruction, the heroes received no lasting recognition. They became kings of Galar in the aftermath, but their names faded from memory even as their descendants ruled for generations. 2,000 years ago, the Hoenn region found itself under siege from space. Meteors bombarded the land repeatedly, bringing destruction wherever they fell. The Draconid people's home was completely wiped out by one particularly large impact, forming what would later be called Meteor Falls. But these meteors carried more than destruction. They contained natural energy that seeped it into the region, causing an abundance of power that attracted the attention of sleeping titans. Kyogre and Groudon awakened from their long rest, drawn by the energy the meteors had released. They coveted this power and clashed once again, their battle bringing death and devastation to the Hoenn people, who had no defense against such primal forces. The land shook as Groudon expanded continents. Tsunamis swept away coastal settlements as Kyogre commanded the seas. The people faced extinction unless something intervened. The Draconid people made a desperate wish to Rayquaza, calling out to the sky-high Pokémon they had once worshipped. Rayquaza heard their plea and descended from the atmosphere where it had been watching the world below. The great serpent ended the fighting between Groudon and Kyogre, forcing them back into dormancy through sheer dominance. The Draconid people, grateful for salvation, began to worship Rayquaza with renewed devotion. Their culture would revolve around this legendary being for the next 2,000 years. 1,000 years before the modern era, the Johto region experienced the construction of two towers that would become legendary. The Brass Tower and the Bell Tower rose in Ekritique City, built by humans who wished to honor Pokémon and strengthen the bonds between species. These towers stood as symbols of hope and cooperation, their architecture designed to last for centuries. Another quiet detail appears when we look closer at the legendary birds who came to roost at these towers. Ho-Oh made the Bell Tower its home, drawn by the reverence humans showed toward Pokémon. Lugia found sanctuary at the Brass Tower, though it would later relocate to the depths of the sea. These two powerful beings brought blessings to Ekritique, and for a time, harmony reigned between humans and Pokémon in that place. But 150 years ago, tragedy struck the towers. Lightning ignited the Brass Tower during a terrible storm, and fire consumed the wooden structure, despite all efforts to save it. 3 Pokémon perished in the flames, forms that would later be identified as Flareon, Jolteon, and Vaporeon by scholars who studied the event. Ho-Oh witnessed these deaths and felt profound sorrow at the loss. Using powers few understood, Ho-Oh revived the 3 fallen Pokémon, transforming them into new beings. They became Entei, Raikou, and Suicune, legendary beasts who embodied fire, lightning, and water. These resurrected Pokémon fled the burned tower and scattered across Johto, becoming the wandering legends that future trainers would seek. Lugia, disturbed by the violence of the fire and the chaos that followed, left for the Whirl Islands. The great bird dove into the ocean depths and made its home in underwater caverns where it could rest without fear of further conflict. The burned remains of the Brass Tower stood as a reminder of how quickly disaster could strike, even in places meant to symbolize permanence. Around 200 years ago, development began on Aura's cipher facilities, though the region's history remained sparse compared to others. These buildings would later play a role in darker experiments, but for now they were simply structures being prepared for purposes not yet revealed. Meanwhile, in Sinnoh, a young man named Volo became obsessed with the idea of creating a better world. He studied ancient texts and learned of Arceus, the being who had shaped reality itself. Volo believed that if he could summon Arceus and harness its power, he could remake the world according to his vision of perfection. This obsession would drive him to terrible actions in the years to come, though for now his plans remained hidden within his mind. 70 years ago, Team Rocket's origin story began with the birth of Giovanni in Viridian City. He would grow up to become the most powerful crime boss in Kanto, but as a child, he was simply another person living in a quiet town. His future ambitions lay dormant, waiting for circumstances to shape him into the figure he would become. 50 years before the modern games, scientists in Cinnabar Island made a discovery that would have profound consequences. They found Mew in the jungles of Guyana, the legendary ancestor of all Pokémon that had remained hidden for millions of years. Researchers documented Mew's existence and collected genetic samples, but the being itself disappeared before they could study it extensively. A scientist gave birth to a daughter at Cinnabar Mansion around this time, though this personal detail seemed insignificant compared to the legendary discovery. The scientists began experimenting with Mew's DNA, attempting to understand the genetic code that had given rise to all Pokémon species. Their research pushed the boundaries of what was ethically acceptable, driven by curiosity and ambition rather than wisdom. They sought to create a more powerful version of Mew, a being that combined the ancestors' genetic potential with enhancements designed by human intelligence. 20 years ago, their experiments succeeded in ways they had not anticipated. Mewtwo came into existence on February 6th, a Pokémon created entirely through human manipulation of Mew's genetic code. But Mewtwo was not the obedient creation its makers had envisioned. The psychic type possessed intelligence that matched or exceeded human capability, along with power that dwarfed almost every other Pokémon. Mewtwo was confused by its existence, unsure whether it was a Pokémon or something else entirely. It had no parent, no species to belong to, only scientists who looked at it as an experiment rather than a living being. Mewtwo's confusion turned to anger. It destroyed the laboratory on Cinnabar Island where it had been created, killing researchers who had treated it as property rather than a conscious entity. The laboratory burned completely, leaving only ruins that would later be discovered by trainers who had no idea what had happened there. Mewtwo fled into the wilderness, grappling with questions about identity and purpose that its creators had never considered important. Giovanni, now an adult and leader of Team Rocket, learned of Mewtwo's existence. He saw an opportunity to harness the most powerful Pokémon ever created for his criminal organization's purposes. Through manipulation and offers of purpose, Giovanni convinced Mewtwo to serve Team Rocket. For a time, the legendary Pokémon became a weapon for organized crime, though resentment grew with each task it was forced to complete. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we approach the era when the games themselves begin. The timeline splits and converges across different regions, with stories unfolding simultaneously in Kanto and Johto, then Hoenn and Sinnoh, each region experiencing its own crisis and resolution while others remain unaware. In Kanto, a young trainer embarked on a journey that would reshape the region's power structure. This was Red, though some timelines knew him as Leaf or other names. The trainer left Pallet Town with a starter Pokémon given by Professor Oak, beginning what seemed like an ordinary journey to challenge the Pokémon League and become champion. But Team Rocket's activities throughout Kanto drew the trainer into conflicts far larger than gym battles. Giovanni's criminal empire had infiltrated multiple cities, using Pokémon for illegal operations that ranged from theft to more sinister experiments. The young trainer repeatedly encountered and defeated Team Rocket operations, dismantling their schemes in Cerulean, Celadon, and Saffron City. Each victory weakened Giovanni's organization while strengthening the trainer's team and reputation. The confrontations escalated until the trainer faced Giovanni himself at the Viridian City Gym. Giovanni held the position of gym leader while secretly running Team Rocket, a duality that spoke to how deeply crime had penetrated Kanto's institutions. When the trainer defeated him, Giovanni made a decision that shocked everyone who knew of Team Rocket's power. He disbanded the organization entirely, walking away from the empire he had built. The defeat by a young trainer had shown him something about the strength of bonds versus the weakness of control through fear. Red continued to the Pokémon League, defeating the Elite Four and then the champion to claim the title. But rather than enjoying fame, Red retreated to Mount Silver, the highest peak on the border between Kanto and Johto. There he trained in isolation, his team growing impossibly strong through dedication that bordered on obsession. He became a legend himself, a silent presence who would later be sought by trainers hoping to test themselves against the greatest. 3 years after Red's journey, another trainer began an adventure in Johto. This young person from New Barktown received their starter from Professor Elm and set out to challenge gyms and collect badges. But shadows from the past had not completely faded. Former members of Team Rocket, refusing to accept their organization's disbandment, attempted to resurrect their criminal enterprise under new leadership. These remnants operated from the Johto region, conducting experiments and schemes in the hope that Giovanni would return to lead them once more. They took over the Goldenrod radio tower and attempted to broadcast a signal that would summon Giovanni back. The Johto trainer repeatedly encountered and thwarted these operations, eventually confronting the remnants at their headquarters in Mahogany Town. The ruins of the Brass Tower, now called the Burned Tower, became significant during this journey. The trainer's actions at various points awakened the legendary beasts, Entei, Raikou, and Suicune, causing them to roam across Johto. These encounters with living legends deepened the trainer's understanding of the bond between humans and Pokémon, showing that some connections transcended ownership or control. After becoming Johto's champion, the trainer received permission to travel to Kanto and challenge its gym leaders. This journey through a familiar region showed how 3 years had changed the landscape. Giovanni was gone, replaced by Blue as Viridian's gym leader. Sabrina, Blaine, and others had adapted to a Kanto without Team Rocket's shadow. The trainer's ultimate test came at Mount Silver, where Red waited in eternal training. The battle between these two trainers became legendary, a clash of the strongest teams under harsh conditions where only dedication and strategy mattered. Whether the Johto trainer won or lost, the encounter proved that strength came not from dominating others, but from the bonds forged through trust and shared struggle. Hoenn's story unfolded around the same period, though its crisis differed from Kanto's criminal organizations. Two teams emerged in this region, each obsessed with legendary Pokémon that embodied fundamental forces. Team Magma, led by Maxie, believed humanity needed more land to prosper. They sought to awaken Groudon and use its power to expand continents and dry up oceans. Team Aqua, led by Archie, held the opposite view. They wanted to awaken Kyogre and return the world to a more aquatic state, believing the ocean represented the source of all life. A young trainer from Little Root Town became entangled in these conflicting visions. The trainer was the child of Norman, the Petalburg gym leader, and had moved to Hoenn recently. As they challenged gyms and explored the region, they repeatedly encountered both teams conducting operations meant to advance their respective goals. Neither Maxie nor Archie truly understood the consequences of awakening super ancient Pokémon, focusing only on their ideological visions rather than practical reality. If you're still awake halfway through, maybe subscribe before you drift off, and tell me what time it is where you're watching from. The crisis reached its peak when one team succeeded in awakening their target legendary. Groudon or Kyogre, depending on which timeline unfolded, emerged from dormancy and began reshaping Hoenn according to its nature. Groudon caused intense drought that evaporated water and cracked the earth. Kyogre brought torrential rain that threatened to flood entire cities. The legendary Pokemon's power operated on a scale that human technology could not match, and the team leaders realized too late that they had unleashed something they could not control. The trainer traveled to the Cave of Origin in Suetopolis City, where the legendary Pokemon's rampage threatened to destroy the region. Only the intervention of Rayquaza, summoned from its sky domain through ancient methods preserved by the Draconid people, could stop the catastrophe. The sky-high Pokémon descended and forced Groudon or Kyogre back into dormancy, restoring balance to Hoenn's climate. Maxie and Archie both recognized the foolishness of their ambitions. They disbanded their teams and disappeared from public view, presumably to reflect on how their ideologies had nearly destroyed the region they claimed to love. The trainer went on to challenge the Pokemon League and became champion, though the real victory had been preventing an ecological apocalypse. In some timelines, a different threat emerged involving Rayquaza and the Delta Stream ability. A meteor approached Earth, large enough to cause mass extinction if it struck. The trainer worked with Stephen Stone and the Draconid people to reach Rayquaza at the Sky Pillar. Through a process involving mega evolution, Rayquaza achieved a new form with power sufficient to destroy the approaching meteor. This event, known to some as the Delta episode, showed that threats to the Pokemon world could come from beyond the planet itself. Sinnoh's story began when a young trainer from Twin Leaf Town embarked on what seemed like a simple journey to complete the Pokédex for Professor Rowan. But Sinnoh held deeper mysteries than other regions. Its connection to creation myths, making it a place where legends walked more freely than elsewhere. Team Galactic, led by a man named Cyrus, sought to exploit these myths for purposes that went far beyond criminal profit. Cyrus believed the world was fundamentally flawed, filled with conflict and suffering born from incomplete emotions and willpower. He theorized that by summoning Dialga and Palkia and using their power to create a new universe, he could make a reality without strife or pain. His vision was not evil in its intent, but terrifying in its scope, the complete erasure of the current universe and then everyone in it, replaced by Cyrus's concept of perfection. Team Galactic conducted operations across Sinnoh to gather the materials needed for this summoning. They stole Pokémon, harvested energy from power plants, and researched ancient texts about the Lake Guardians. The trainer, along with their rival Barry, repeatedly interfered with these operations while pursuing their own journey to challenge gyms and grow stronger. The crisis culminated at Mount Coronet's Peak, a place called Spear Pillar, where the boundary between dimensions grew thin. Cyrus used the red chain, forged from crystals taken from the Lake Guardians, to summon both Dialga and Palkia. He attempted to command these beings to create his new universe, but the appearance of Giratina disrupted his plan. The renegade Pokémon emerged from the distortion world, angry at the disruption being caused to reality's fabric. Giratina dragged Cyrus into the distortion world, a realm where physics operated differently and time flowed in strange patterns. The trainer followed, navigating this twisted dimension to confront Cyrus one final time. Whether the trainer defeated him or Cyrus simply gave up after realizing his plan had failed, the threat to the universe ended. Dialga and Palkia returned to their dimensional watching, and Giratina retreated back to its exile. The trainer went on to become Sinnoh's champion, but the region had come closer to total annihilation than any other. Cyrus's ambition had been to literally unmake reality, and only the intervention of a Pokémon who hated being summoned had prevented that outcome. In some timelines, additional events unfolded involving Darkrai and Cresselia at New Moon Island, or Shaman in the Flower Paradise, or Arceus itself appearing after the player gathered all of its plates. These encounters with legendary beings reinforced Sinnoh's nature as a region where the boundary between the ordinary and the mythical remained perpetually thin. Another quiet detail appears when we look closer at the Unova region and the story that began there. Two young trainers from Nuvema Town started their journeys around the same period, though the version of events varied. In one timeline, the trainer was a boy named Hilbert, in another, a girl named Hilda. They received their starter Pokémon from Professor Juniper and began what seemed like a traditional journey through gym challenges. But Unova held a darker history than most regions, and that history manifested in Team Plasma. This organization presented itself as liberators, claiming that Pokémon were oppressed by trainers who kept them in Pokéballs against their will. Team Plasma's leader, a young man named N, genuinely believed in this philosophy. He had been raised by Pokémon and could understand their speech, which gave him insight into their perspectives that few humans possessed. But N was being manipulated. Getsus, who claimed to be a sage of Team Plasma, had raised N specifically to serve as a figurehead. Getsus's true goal was to convince everyone else to release their Pokémon, leaving him as the only person in Unova with Pokémon powerful enough to rule the region. He had spent years engineering N's beliefs, showing him only abused and mistreated Pokémon to convince him that all trainers caused suffering. The plan reached its culmination when N summoned Reshiram or Zekrom, legendary dragons that embodied truth and ideals. These beings had once been a single dragon, split apart during an ancient conflict between twin heroes who couldn't agree on whether truth or ideals should guide the world. N used his legendary dragon to challenge the Pokémon League, defeating champion Alder and claiming authority over Unova. The trainer caught the opposite legendary dragon, Zekrom if N had Reshiram, or Reshiram if N had Zekrom, and confronted both N and Getsus at N's castle, a structure that had erupted from beneath the Pokémon League building. The battle between legendary dragons represented a fundamental philosophical clash. N believed that separating Pokémon from trainers would end suffering. The trainer embodied the belief that bonds between species could be genuine and mutually beneficial. When N lost the battle, his worldview shattered. He realized that the trainer's Pokémon fought not from compulsion, but from friendship and trust. Getsus revealed his true nature then, attacking N verbally for failing to be the puppet he was supposed to be. The trainer defeated Getsus as well, dismantling Team Plasma's leadership and exposing the manipulation that had driven their movement. N departed Unova on his legendary dragon, seeking to understand the world beyond the narrow vision Getsus had created for him. The region began recovering from the ideological conflict that had nearly torn it apart, though shadows of Team Plasma's influence remained. 2 years later, a new trainer from Aspergia City began a journey through a changed Unova. This was either Nate or Rosa, depending on the timeline, and they found a region that had moved forward from N's uprising. But Team Plasma had not completely disappeared. The organization split into 2 factions after Getsus's defeat. One group, led by former members who genuinely believed in protecting Pokémon, worked to help abandoned or injured Pokémon find new homes. The other faction remained loyal to Getsus and continued his vision of domination. This second faction operated in secret, led by Colress, a scientist obsessed with drawing out Pokémon's maximum power through any means necessary. They sought Kyurem, the third legendary dragon that represented the emptiness left when the original dragon split into Reshiram and Zekrom. Getsus, though injured from his previous defeat, commanded this faction from the shadows. The new trainer's journey intersected with both Team Plasma factions repeatedly. They watched as the good faction tried to atone for their organization's past, while the evil faction conducted experiments that grew increasingly desperate. The crisis peaked when Getsus captured Kyurem and used technology to forcibly fuse it with either Reshiram or Zekrom, creating a new form called Black Kyurem or White Kyurem. The trainer confronted Getsus at the Giant Chasm, where the Mad Leader attempted to use his fused legendary dragon to freeze Unova into submission. But the trainer's team proved strong enough to defeat even this enhanced legendary Pokémon, and Getsus suffered a complete mental breakdown when faced with a second defeat. The Shadow Triad, mysterious servants who had been loyal to Getsus, took him away to places unknown. Colress, acknowledging that bonds between trainers and Pokémon produced a greater power than his forced methods, abandoned Team Plasma's cause. N returned briefly to Unova during these events, reuniting with the trainer from 2 years prior and witnessing how the region had changed. He seemed more at peace with his identity and purpose, having seen enough of the world to understand that both truth and ideals had value, that neither could be dismissed in favor of the other. The Kalos region experienced its own crisis, involving legendary Pokémon and an organization with destructive goals. A trainer from Vanilleville Town began their journey alongside 4 friends, each seeking different things from their adventure. Shauna wanted fun and memories. Tierno dreamed of creating dance teams with Pokémon. Trevor focused on completing the Pokédex. Serena or Callum, depending on which gender the main trainer was, became the protagonist's primary rival. But Kalos held secrets from 3,000 years ago, when the great weapon AZ created had ended the Kalos War. Team Flare, led by a man named Lysandra, discovered information about this weapon and decided that humanity's constant growth threatened to consume the planet's resources. Lysandra concluded that the only solution was to eliminate most of humanity and Pokémon, preserving a select few who met his standards for beauty and worth. Team Flare operated openly in Kalos society, disguised as a fashionable organization that wealthy individuals could join for prestige. Lysandra himself presented as a philanthropist concerned with the world's future. But beneath this facade, Team Flare scientists worked to restore and modify the ancient weapon, locating it in Geosenge Town, where it had been buried millennia ago. The trainer challenged Kalos's gyms while repeatedly encountering Team Flare operations. The organization's true nature became clear gradually, revelations building until the full scope of Lysandra's plan emerged. He intended to power the ultimate weapon using Xerneas or Eviltal, legendary Pokémon representing life and destruction. These beings had cycled through periods of activity and dormancy for thousands of years, and Lysandra planned to harness their power for genocide on a scale that would dwarf even AZ's massacre. The trainer descended into Team Flare's secret headquarters beneath Geosenge Town, fighting through members who genuinely believed that purging most of humanity served a greater good. At the deepest level, they found Lysandra preparing to activate the weapon. The legendary Pokémon Xerneas or Eviltal appeared, and whether through the trainer's capture or some other intervention, the weapon's activation was disrupted. Lysandra refused to accept defeat. The ultimate weapon activated partially, its energy destroying Team Flare's base, but failing to accomplish the mass extinction Lysandra had planned. Whether Lysandra died in the destruction or escaped to parts unknown, his threat to Kalos ended. The trainer went on to challenge the Pokémon League and became champion, though the memory of how close the region had come to annihilation lingered. AZ appeared during the aftermath, having witnessed yet another person attempting to use the weapon he had created 3,000 years ago. The trainer's bond with their Pokémon reminded AZ of his original love for Floette, the emotion that had motivated him to commit atrocities in grief. At the champion's celebration, Floette finally returned to AZ after 3 millennia of separation, forgiving him at last. The immortal king wept, his burden of guilt eased by reconciliation he had thought impossible. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we move into the Alola region and the story that unfolded in that tropical paradise. Alola consisted of 4 main islands, each with its own guardian deity and culture. Rather than a traditional Pokémon League, Alola used the Island Challenge, a trial-based system where trainers prove themselves through various tests before facing island kahunas in grand trials. A young trainer arrived in Alola from Kanto, moving to Melamele Island with their mother. They received their starter Pokémon from the island kahuna, Hala, and began the island challenge alongside other trainers their age. One companion was Hao, Hala's grandson, who approached his journey with cheerful optimism. Another was Lily, a mysterious girl who carried a Pokémon called Cosmog in her bag and seemed frightened of touching Pokémon despite caring deeply for them. Lily's fear stemmed from trauma inflicted by her mother, Lusamine, who led the Ether Foundation. This organization presented itself as a Pokémon conservation group, protecting species and operating a sanctuary. But Lusamine had become obsessed with Ultra Beasts, creatures from other dimensions that occasionally appeared in Alola through rifts called Ultra Wormholes. Her obsession grew from grief over her husband's disappearance into one of these wormholes years ago. Lusamine's desire to reach Ultra Space and find her lost husband warped into something unhealthy. She began to see Ultra Beasts as more beautiful and worthy than ordinary Pokémon or even her own children. Lily had fled from the Ether Foundation with Cosmog, which her mother had been experimenting on, and was now traveling with the trainer while trying to protect the small legendary Pokémon. Another faction emerged in Alola's story. Team Skull, led by Guzma, presented themselves as rebellious outcasts who had failed the island challenge and now rejected Alola's traditions. They caused trouble throughout the region, but seemed more pathetic than threatening, criminals who couldn't even properly organize their schemes. Guzma himself harbored deep resentment toward Hala, who had rejected him as a student years ago. The truth revealed itself gradually. Team Skull worked for the Ether Foundation, conducting operations that Lusamine wanted done without directly implicating her organization. Guzma served Lusamine because she offered him purpose and validation that his failures in the island challenge had denied. The entire elaborate structure existed to facilitate Lusamine's plan to open an ultra wormhole and enter ultra space. Events reached a crisis when Lusamine succeeded in opening a wormhole at the Ether Foundation's artificial island. She entered ultra space along with Guzma, seeking the dimension called Ultra Deep Sea, where she believed her husband waited. The trainer, along with Lily and others, followed using Cosmog, who had evolved into Cosmoem and then into either Solgaleo or Lunala, legendary Pokémon capable of opening ultra wormholes. In ultra space, they found Lusamine had merged with a Nihilego, an ultra beast that enhanced her obsession and toxicity. The trainer battled and defeated her, forcing the separation and allowing the group to return to Alola. Lusamine's condition after the merger required treatment, and she began the slow process of recovering from her obsession while trying to rebuild relationships with her children. Lily grew throughout these events, overcoming her fear of touching Pokémon and developing confidence in herself. By the story's end, she decided to travel to Kanto to learn how to become a proper trainer, taking her mother's unconscious or recovering form with her to seek additional medical treatment. The trainer completed the island challenge and ascended Mount Lanakila, where Alola had recently constructed a Pokémon League building. They defeated the newly formed Elite Four and faced Professor Kukui or Hao in the championship match, claiming the title of Alola's first champion. In alternate timelines or continuing stories, the trainer encountered the Ultra Recon Squad, people from Ultra Megalopolis, who warned of Necrozma, a being that had stolen their world's light. Necrozma could fuse with Solgaleo or Lunala, creating forms called Dusk Mane Necrozma or Dawnwings Necrozma. The trainer had to confront this threat and restore light to Ultra Megalopolis, showing that some responsibilities extended beyond a single region or dimension. The Galar region's story began with a young trainer from Postwick, a small town in the southern countryside. They became rivals with Hop, the younger brother of Leon, who was Galar's undefeated champion. The two received their starter Pokémon from Leon and embarked on the Gym Challenge, a highly publicized competition where trainers battled through 8 gyms while being broadcast on television. Galar's culture revolved around Pokémon battles more than any other region. The Gym Challenge functioned as mass entertainment, with matches they held in enormous stadiums before cheering crowds. The Dynamax phenomenon, unique to Galar, allowed Pokémon to grow to enormous size during battles in special locations called power spots. This spectacle drew millions of viewers and made successful trainers into celebrities. Chairman Rose led the Galar Pokémon League and served as the region's most powerful figure outside the monarchy. He appeared to be a benevolent businessman concerned with Galar's future energy needs. But Rose harbored fears about an energy crisis he believed would strike Galar in approximately 1,000 years. His solution involved awakening Eternatus, the same being that had caused the darkest day 3,000 years ago, and using its power to provide unlimited energy. The trainer progressed through the Gym Challenge alongside several rivals. Hop struggled with self-doubt after repeated losses. Bede, an orphan sponsored by Chairman Rose, sought to prove his worth through victory. Marnie represented Spikemuth, a town that had declined after being denied a power spot for Dynamax battles. Each rival had their own motivations and development throughout the journey. Events escalated when Rose decided he couldn't wait any longer to solve the energy crisis, even though 1,000 years remained before it would occur. He awakened Eternatus, causing another darkest day as the cosmic Pokémon released energy that made wild Pokémon Dynamax across Galar. The region descended into chaos as giant Pokémon rampaged. Leon attempted to handle the crisis alone, true to his role as champion and protector of Galar. But the trainer, along with Hop, pursued him to the energy plant, where Eternatus had been sealed. There they found Leon unable to capture Eternatus, the being's power too great for any ordinary Pokeball. The legendary wolves Zacian and Zamazenta appeared, sensing the same threat their ancient wielders had faced 3,000 years ago. With Zacian or Zamazenta's help, the trainer battled Eternatus in its true form, a massive serpentine creature that towered over the battlefield. The legendary wolf's power, combined with the trainer's skill, succeeded in weakening Eternatus enough for capture. The darkest day ended, and Galar began recovering from the chaos Chairman Rose's impatience had caused. Rose turned himself in to authorities, accepting responsibility for the disaster he had nearly created. Leon, shaken by his inability to resolve the crisis without help, decided to step down as champion. The trainer faced him in a final battle at Wyndon Stadium before enormous crowds, claiming the title of Galar's new champion after Leon's unprecedented winning streak finally ended. Hop, witnessing both his brother's defeat and the trainer's growth, decided to become a Pokémon professor rather than continue pursuing championships. Bede became the new fairy-type gym leader after Opal retired. Marnie took over as Spikemuth's gym leader, using her position to help revitalize her hometown. The gym challenge continued, but Galar had been fundamentally changed by how close it came to repeating the darkest day's destruction. Another quiet detail appears when we look closer at the Hisui region, ancient Sinnoh, before modern civilization developed. A young person fell from a rift in space-time, arriving in Hisui with no memory of how they got there. They were found by Professor Laventon of the Galaxy Expedition Team, a research group documenting Pokémon in this wild, dangerous land where humans and Pokémon had not yet learned to coexist peacefully. Hisui in this era was frontier territory. Humans lived in small settlements, surrounded by hostile wilderness, where powerful Pokémon attacked without provocation. The concept of catching Pokémon in Pokeballs was new and frightening to most people. The Galaxy team sought to complete the first Pokédex, recording information about every Pokémon species in the region, but this mission faced constant danger. The displaced trainer joined the Survey Corps, one of several divisions within the Galaxy team. They worked to document Pokémon by catching them, observing their behaviors, and completing research tasks. This differed from later eras, where catching Pokémon was casual and common. In Hisui, every capture required skill and caution, and many Pokémon would attack trainers directly rather than focusing solely on other Pokémon during battles. The region was divided into territories, each watched over by a noble Pokémon descended from those blessed by Arceus long ago. These nobles served as guardians for their areas, and humans worshipped them with offerings and respect. But something was going wrong with the nobles. One by one, they became frenzied, their eyes glowing with strange energy as they attacked everything nearby without reason. The trainer was tasked with quelling these frenzied nobles, using special bombs made from their favorite foods while dodging their attacks. This required both combat skill and understanding of each noble's patterns and weaknesses. As the trainer calmed each noble, they learned that the frenzy was being deliberately caused by someone manipulating the space-time distortions appearing throughout Hisui. Volo, a merchant who traveled Hisui selling wares, revealed himself as the mastermind behind the distortions. He had spent years researching Arceus and searching for the legendary plates that contained fragments of the creator's power. Volo believed that by summoning Arceus and defeating it, he could claim godhood and remake reality according to his vision of a perfect world. His philosophy resembled Cyrus's from centuries in the future, both men convinced that the current world's flaws justified its destruction and replacement. The trainer confronted Volo at the Temple of Sinnoh, where he summoned Giratina from the distortion world. The battle that followed was among the most difficult any Pokémon trainer had ever faced, with Volo's team being exceptionally powerful and Giratina transforming into its origin form when initially defeated. Even after the trainer won, Volo's obsession remained unshaken. He vanished into history, his goals unfulfilled, but his ambition undiminished. The space-time rift that had brought the trainer to Hisui began destabilizing reality itself. Dialga or Palkia, depending on which legend the story followed, went berserk at the Temple of Sinnoh, their power threatening to tear apart the boundary between dimensions. The trainer climbed to Spear Pillar and faced the enraged legendary Pokémon, using the Origin Ball crafted from materials Arceus had once blessed to calm or catch it. With the crisis resolved, the trainer's actions had proven that humans and Pokémon could work together rather than existing in fear of each other. The Galaxy team continued its research with renewed purpose, laying the foundation for the peaceful coexistence that would eventually develop into the Sinnoh region's future culture. Whether the trainer ever returned to their original time remained uncertain, but their impact on Hisui's history would echo through the centuries. The Paldea region's story differed from previous regions in its structure and focus. Rather than a linear gym challenge, Paldea allowed complete freedom of exploration. A young trainer enrolled at either Naranja or Uva Academy. The names differed between timelines, but the institutions were identical, and began a treasure hunt that served as their education in Pokémon training. The region sprawled across diverse terrain, from deserts to mountains to coastlines, all connected by open areas where Pokémon roamed freely. The trainer could approach challenges in any order, making their journey unique compared to others. 3 main storylines developed simultaneously, each representing a different aspect of the treasure hunt. The Victory Road path followed the traditional challenge of defeating 8 gym leaders and eventually the Pokémon League. But Paldea's gyms had no level restrictions or order requirements. A trainer could challenge the strongest gym first if they wished, though they would face appropriately difficult battles. The gym leaders were diverse in personality and strength, each representing their town's culture and values. Nimona, the trainer's primary rival, was already a champion-ranked trainer despite her young age. She sought a rival who could match her skill, becoming increasingly excited as the trainer proved themselves capable. Her enthusiasm for battle bordered on obsession, but stemmed from genuine love of competition and desire to face opponents who wouldn't hold back against her. The Starfall Street storyline involved Team Star, an organization of delinquent students who had established bases across Paldea. Unlike previous criminal teams, Team Star members were not evil. They had banded together years ago to protect each other from bullying at the academy, but their methods led to them being branded as the bullies instead. The truth of what happened had been buried by Director Clavel, who wiped records of the original bullying to protect the academy's reputation. The trainer was encouraged by a mysterious figure called Cassiopeia to dismantle Team Star's bases. Each base was led by a squad boss who specialized in a different Pokémon type and drove a custom vehicle called a Starmobile. These bosses fought fiercely to protect their squads, but gradually the trainer learned their real history. They were victims who had formed Team Star for self-defense, only to be abandoned by the adults who should have protected them. Cassiopeia was revealed to be Penny, a shy student skilled in hacking. She had wanted Team Star disbanded because she cared about the members and knew their reputation was preventing them from moving forward with their lives. Director Clavel, disguised as the mysterious Clive, who had been supporting the trainer, also sought to help Team Star members reintegrate into academy life. After the bases were dismantled and the truth revealed, the squad bosses agreed to turn their bases into training facilities rather than hideouts. The Path of Legends involved helping Arvin, a student researching a book called the Scarlet Book or Violet Book, depending on the timeline. This book described his parents' research into the Great Crater of Paldea, also known as Area Zero, and mentioned mysterious Pokémon called Paradox Pokémon. Arvin's companion was Mabostif, who had been severely injured exploring Area Zero and now needed special herbs to fully recover. These herbs, called a Herba Mystica, were guarded by Titan Pokémon, unusually large and powerful individuals of various species. The trainer and Arvin worked together to defeat these titans and collect the herbs, gradually healing Mabostif while also strengthening Koraidon or Miraidon, legendary Pokémon who had been injured in the past and accompanied the trainer. Through these adventures, Arvin revealed his complicated feelings about his parent, Professor Sada or Professor Turo, who had essentially abandoned him to pursue research in Area Zero. The professor had not contacted Arvin in years, leaving him to raise himself while they obsessed over discovering the secrets of time travel and Paradox Pokémon. After completing the Victory Road storyline and defeating the Elite Four and Champion Gita, the trainer gained permission to enter Area Zero. Arvin, Nimona, and Penny joined this expedition into the massive crater that dominated central Paldea. They descended through layers of unique ecosystem, encountering paradox Pokémon that resembled modern species but were clearly from different time periods. Deep within Area Zero, they discovered Research Station Lab, where Professor Sada or Turo had conducted their experiments. The professor appeared to greet them, but the truth emerged quickly. The real professor had died some time ago, killed by the second Koraidon or Miraidon they had brought from the past or future. An AI replica had been communicating with Arvin, unable to tell him the truth about his parents' death because its programming prevented such revelation. The professor's research had succeeded in creating a time machine, pulling Pokémon from the ancient past or distant future into the present. This included both Koraidon or Miraidon specimens, one of which had bonded with the trainer, while the other remained aggressive and territorial. The time machine continued operating automatically, threatening to flood Paldea with paradox Pokémon that could devastate local ecosystems. The AI professor asked the trainer and their friends to destroy the time machine to prevent this catastrophe. But a failsafe activated, forcing the AI to fight to protect the machine, even though it wanted to be destroyed. The AI possessed the aggressive Koraidon, or Miraidon, and battled the trainer with everything at its disposal. After being defeated, the AI explained that it couldn't destroy the machine while remaining in the present timeline. The AI professor departed into the past or future through the time machine, planning to destroy it from a different time period before it could be created. Whether this worked or created a paradox remained unclear, but the immediate threat ended. The group returned to the surface, with Arvin processing the loss of a parent who had already been gone emotionally long before their physical death. Later, the trainer received an invitation to visit the Blueberry Academy in the Unova region. This school operated in a massive underwater terrarium that simulated 4 different biomes for Pokémon from various climates. The invitation came from Carmine and Kieran, siblings from the Kitakami region who had met the trainer during a previous field trip. The Blueberry Academy storyline revealed Kieran's descent into obsession after feeling betrayed during the Kitakami trip. He had become the Academy's champion through relentless training, but his methods had made him cold and cruel to others. The trainer challenged the Blueberry League's Elite Four and ultimately faced Kieran, whose defeat in battle shattered his confidence completely. During a subsequent trip back to Paldea's Area Zero, now with the Blueberry Academy students accompanying them, the group searched for Terrapagos. This legendary Pokémon had been crystallized for millions of years and represented the source of terrestrialization, the phenomenon that allowed Paldean Pokémon to change types. They found Terrapagos in its dormant form deep within Area Zero's crystal caves. Kieran attempted to catch Terrapagos using a Master Ball, hoping its power would let him finally defeat the trainer. But Terrapagos' awakening released more energy than he could control. The Pokémon entered its stellar form, absorbing terrestrial energy and becoming a threat to everyone present. The trainer and Kieran worked together to stop it, their cooperation helping Kieran find redemption and peace with his earlier failures. In the aftermath, Professor Sada, or Turo, the real one, somehow pulled from the past before their death through space-time distortions, appeared briefly at the crystal pool in Kitakami. The trainer encountered them and gave them Briar's book about the expedition, which the professor traded for their copy of the Scarlet or Violet book. Then the professor disappeared back through time, leaving questions about whether this meeting had always been part of the timeline or if it represented a change to history. The regions of the Pokémon world each carry their own rhythm and mythology, their own ways of understanding the bonds between humans and Pokémon. In Kanto, where the journey began for many trainers, the landscape was defined by proximity to legendary birds who represented the fundamental forces of elemental power. Articuno resided in the Seafoam Islands, its presence cooling the waters around it to near freezing. The ice-type bird had been a mystery to Kanto's people for generations, appearing only rarely to those who sought it in the deepest caverns where ice never melted. Zapdos made its home in the abandoned power plant near Route 10, drawn to electrical energy that hummed through old machinery left to rust. Lightning surrounded this legendary bird, crackling across yellow feathers in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Stories passed among Kanto's trainers suggested that Zapdos created the thunderstorms that swept across the region each spring, though whether this was observation or folklore remained uncertain. Moltres nested in Victory Road, the cavern system trainers had to navigate before reaching the Pokémon League. Fire surrounded it constantly, flames that never extinguished and seemed to draw heat from the very air. The legendary bird's presence warmed the entire mountain, creating microclimates where Pokémon who preferred heat could thrive despite the altitude. Trainers who encountered Moltres in those dark passages spoke of how its flames illuminated the cavern walls, turning rock into flowing orange light. These three birds served different roles in Kanto's ecosystem, their powers balancing in ways that prevented any single element from dominating. When all three appeared together, which happened rarely enough to be legendary itself, their combined presence created weather patterns that could be seen from the Indigo Plateau. Ice mist rising from Articuno's wings, lightning arcing from Zapdos across clouds, heat waves shimmering around Moltres' form. Together, they represented the natural forces that shaped Kanto's climate and terrain. Mewtwo's story carried darker implications than the legendary birds. Created in a laboratory rather than born through natural processes, Mewtwo struggled with existential questions that biological Pokémon never faced. It possessed the memories of its creation, the pain of the experiments that had shaped its body and mind. The scientists who made it had treated Mewtwo as property, something to be controlled and studied, rather than a being with thoughts and feelings. After destroying the Cinnabar laboratory, Mewtwo fled to Cerulean Cave, a labyrinthine system of tunnels that descended deep beneath the earth. The cave's dangerous Pokémon and confusing layout kept most trainers from exploring its depths, which suited Mewtwo's desire for isolation. There it remained, grappling with identity and purpose while its power grew through constant refinement of psychic abilities. Giovanni's recruitment of Mewtwo succeeded because he offered what the laboratory had never provided: acknowledgement of Mewtwo as powerful rather than experimental. For a time, Mewtwo served Team Rocket because doing so gave it purpose and direction. But resentment built with each mission, each reminder that Giovanni still viewed it as a tool rather than an equal. When Team Rocket disbanded after Giovanni's defeat by Red, Mewtwo returned to Cerulean Cave and remained there, waiting for something it could not quite define. Trainers who eventually found Mewtwo in those depths faced the most difficult battle of their careers. Mewtwo's psychic power exceeded almost every other Pokémon's capabilities, its speed and special attack overwhelming teams that had defeated Elite Four members with ease. But more than power, Mewtwo fought with intelligence that adapted to opponents' strategies mid-battle. It learned patterns and exploited weaknesses with precision that seemed almost cruel in its efficiency. Those who succeeded in catching Mewtwo often reflected on whether they had truly earned the right to command such a being. Mewtwo obeyed trainer commands after capture, but its Pokédex entries described a Pokémon with a savage heart and powers that made it destined for combat. The ethical implications of catching a Pokémon specifically engineered for battle troubled some trainers enough that they released Mewtwo after capture, deciding that some beings should remain free rather than contained. Another quiet detail appears when we look closer at Johto's relationship with Ecruteak City's towers and the legendary beasts. When the Brass Tower burned 150 years ago, the deaths of the three Pokémon who perished represented more than simple tragedy. They symbolized how quickly one of those human civilization's tools could destroy despite the best intentions. The towers had been built to honor Pokémon, yet one caught fire and became a tomb. Ho-Oh's resurrection of the three perished Pokémon into Entei, Raikou, and Suicune transformed them from victims into legends. But this transformation came with changes that went beyond their appearance. Entei embodied the fire that had killed its previous form, volcanic fury channeled into a beast that left scorched earth wherever it walked. Its cry could be heard across vast distances, a roar that seemed to contain both rage and sorrow. The Pokemon's ruby red mane flickered like flames, never quite still, always burning. Raikou represented the lightning that had struck the brass tower and ignited the fire. Electricity crackled across its body constantly, yellow fur standing on end from static charge. When Raikou moved, thunder followed as if the sky itself announced the beast's presence. Its speed exceeded most Pokemon's ability to track visually, appearing as little more than a yellow blur when it chose to run at full capacity. Trainers who encountered Raikou described feeling the air ionize around them moments before the legendary beast appeared, hair standing on end from atmospheric electricity. Suicune stood apart from its companions in temperament and purpose. Where Entei burned with fury and Raikou crackled with barely contained energy, Suicune moved with grace and deliberation. The water-type beast had the ability to purify contaminated water simply by touching it, a power that seemed almost divine in its purity. Legend suggested that Suicune chose to appear before trainers it deemed worthy, testing them to see if their hearts matched their ambitions. The three beasts scattered across Johto after their resurrection, each seeking something different in their wandering. Entei searched for challenges worthy of its strength. Raikou seemed drawn to storms and places where lightning struck frequently. Suicune traveled to polluted lakes and rivers, quietly purifying water before moving on without acknowledgement or thanks. They were protectors in their own ways, guardians who operated according to instincts implanted during resurrection rather than conscious decision. Lugia's departure to the Whirl Islands after the tower burned represented a different response to the same tragedy. The great bird had watched from the brass tower as fire consumed the structure, unable to prevent the deaths of the three Pokémon trapped inside. Whether Lugia felt guilt or simply recognized that its presence among humans brought danger to those around it, the legendary Pokémon withdrew to oceanic isolation. The Whirl Islands became Lugia's sanctuary, underwater caverns where few humans could follow. Currents around the islands made navigation treacherous for ships, and the depths held pressures that crushed unprepared divers. Lugia descended into these dark waters and remained there, creating a barrier of natural danger between itself and the human world. The bird's cry could sometimes be heard echoing across the waves during storms, a mournful sound that carried for miles. But Lugia's isolation served another purpose beyond self-protection. The legendary bird watched over three smaller islands near the Whirl Islands, where Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres occasionally gathered. When the three legendary birds fought, their combined elemental powers could create catastrophic weather that threatened entire regions. Lugia possessed the ability to calm these conflicts, diving from the depths to restore balance before the birds' clash spiraled into widespread destruction. This role as mediator and guardian gave Lugia purpose, even in isolation. The Pokémon was not hiding from responsibility, but positioning itself where it could respond to threats that required its specific capabilities. Sailors who traveled the waters near the Whirl Islands learned to watch for changes in the current and unusual calm in the waves. These signs suggested Lugia was moving beneath them, the great bird's passage creating eddies and temporary stillness in normally turbulent water. Ho-Oh took a different path after the tower burned. Rather than retreating into isolation like Lugia, the rainbow Pokémon continued to fly across the world, appearing to trainers it deemed pure of heart. These sightings became legendary in themselves, with witnesses describing how Ho-Oh's feathers left rainbow trails across the sky. The bird's presence brought feelings of hope and renewal, as if simply seeing it reassured people that beauty and goodness still existed in the world. The rainbow wing, a feather that occasionally fell from Ho-Oh during its flights, became a sacred relic in Johto. Only trainers who possessed this feather could summon Ho-Oh to the bell tower, recreating the bond between humans and the legendary bird that had existed before the fire. Finding a rainbow wing required more than luck. It required the kind of pure heart that Ho-Oh recognized and rewarded. Many trainers searched their entire lives without seeing the legendary bird, let alone receiving one of its feathers. Celebi represented another aspect of Johto's connection to legendary Pokémon, though its story differed significantly from the tower birds and legendary beasts. The time travel Pokémon could move freely through different eras, appearing in ancient forests and modern cities with equal ease. Celebi existed in all times simultaneously, experiencing past, present, and future as a single continuous moment. This gave it knowledge of events that had not yet occurred, though Celebi rarely shared such information directly. The Ilex Forest served as Celebi's primary home in Johto, a place where time seemed to flow differently than in surrounding areas. Trees in that forest grew older and larger than their species typically reached, as if Celebi's presence accelerated their growth across centuries. Shrines dedicated to the time travel Pokémon dotted the forest, maintained by people who believed Celebi's blessings brought good fortune and protection. Some accounts suggested that Celebi only appeared during times of environmental crisis, using its time travel abilities to guide people toward decisions that would prevent ecological catastrophe. Other stories described Celebi as playful and curious, appearing to children who played in the forest and showing them visions of how the landscape had looked generations ago. Both interpretations might be true, Celebi's nature complex enough to encompass both guardian and innocent observer. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we find that Hoenn's relationship with legendary Pokémon differed from other regions in fundamental ways. Where Kanto and Johto's legends focused on birds and beasts who represented elemental forces, Hoenn's myths centered on titans who had literally shaped the region's geography. Groudon and Kyogre were not simply powerful Pokémon, but geological forces given form. Groudon's body radiated heat, intense enough to evaporate water on contact. The ground type's skin resembled cooled lava, dark red plates separated by glowing orange cracks where molten energy still flowed beneath. When Groudon walked, each footstep left scorched earth that remained hot for days afterward. The Pokemon's presence created droughts that could span continents if left unchecked, drawing moisture from the air and ground until nothing remained but cracked desert. The Pokemon's connection to the earth ran deeper than simple type affiliation. Groudon could sense movements in the planet's crust, feeling tectonic shifts that occurred miles below the surface. This awareness allowed it to predict volcanic eruptions and earthquakes, though whether Groudon caused these events or simply responded to them remained debated among researchers. Some theories suggested that Groudon's awakening triggered seismic activity, the Titan's power resonating through the Earth's mantle. Kyogre embodied the ocean with similar completeness. The water type's blue skin seemed to contain the sea itself, patterns flowing across its body like currents in deep water. When Kyogre swam, it controlled the ocean around it, creating whirlpools and waves with casual movements. The Pokémon could summon rainstorms that lasted for weeks, flooding lowlands and turning rivers into raging torrents that swept away everything in their path. Where Groudon dried the earth, Kyogre sought to drown it. The two titans' opposition was fundamental rather than philosophical. They represented incompatible visions of what the world should be, one all land, the other all ocean. Their clashes throughout history had reshaped Hoenn repeatedly, each battle redrawing coastlines and creating new islands or submerging existing ones. Rayquaza's position above this conflict gave it unique perspective and authority. The sky-high Pokémon flew in the ozone layer, far above the altitudes where even most flying-type Pokémon could survive. From that vantage, Rayquaza could see the entire planet spread below it, watching weather patterns develop and continental drift occurring across millennia. The serpent's green scales seemed designed to absorb energy from cosmic rays and atmospheric particles, sustaining it during the eternal flight. Rayquaza descended only when Gruden and Kyogre's conflict threatened to destabilize the climate beyond recovery. The dragon's presence alone was often enough to make the Titans retreat, recognizing a power that exceeded their own. But when necessary, Rayquaza fought with devastating efficiency, using moves that combined draconic fury with atmospheric control. Its signature attack, Dragon Ascent, involved climbing to extreme altitude before diving at speeds that created sonic booms and pressure waves. The relationship between these three titans represented a balance that extended beyond simple power dynamics. Groudon, Kyogre, and Rayquaza formed a triangle where no single being could dominate permanently. If Groudon expanded the continents too far, Kyogre would awaken to restore the oceans. If Kyogre flooded too much land, Groudon would rise to push back the seas. And if both threatened to destroy the world through their conflict, Rayquaza would intervene to restore equilibrium. This balance had maintained Hoenn's geography for millions of years, creating a region where land and sea existed in proportions that allowed diverse ecosystems to flourish. The people who lived in Hoenn understood that their home existed at the mercy of these three titans, that the land beneath their feet and the ocean surrounding it could be reshaped if the balance ever broke permanently. The Draconid people's worship of Rayquaza stemmed from this understanding. They recognized that the sky-high Pokémon stood as Hoenn's ultimate protector, the being who prevented total destruction when the land and sea warred. The Draconids maintained the Sky Pillar, a tower built to reach toward Rayquaza's domain and call it down when needed. This structure had stood for thousands of years, its stones carved with dragon imagery and ancient script describing the proper rituals for summoning Rayquaza. Only specific conditions allowed humans to reach Rayquaza at the Sky Pillar's peak. The dragon demanded proof of worthiness, testing those who climbed the tower with trials that assessed both strength and purity of purpose. Many who attempted the climb turned back before reaching the summit, recognizing that they lacked what Rayquaza sought. Those who succeeded found themselves before a being whose power dwarfed even other legendary Pokémon, a serpent whose very presence made the air vibrate with contained energy. Mega Evolution's discovery added new dimensions to Rayquaza's already immense power. Unlike other Pokémon who required Mega Stones to achieve Mega Evolution, Rayquaza only needed to learn the move Dragon Ascent. This suggested that Mega Evolution was somehow innate to Rayquaza rather than dependent on external catalysts. When the transformation occurred, the dragon's body lengthened and its appendages extended, creating a form that resembled both a serpent and a missile designed for atmospheric entry. Mega Rayquaza's power exceeded almost every other known Pokémon. Its ability, Delta Stream, created weather conditions that negated the weaknesses flying types normally suffered, surrounding the battlefield with strange atmospheric currents. In this form, Rayquaza possessed the strength to destroy approaching meteors the size of mountains, defending Earth from cosmic threats that would cause mass extinctions if they struck. The Delta episode revealed this role explicitly, showing how Rayquaza had protected the planet from asteroid impacts throughout history. The meteor approaching Hoenn during that crisis was not the first Rayquaza had destroyed, merely the first one humans had witnessed. Countless times across millions of years, meteors had approached Earth only to be obliterated by the green dragon who watched from the ozone layer. Humanity's existence owed a debt to Rayquaza's eternal vigilance, though most people never realized this guardian floated invisible above them. Deoxys added complexity to this dynamic. The psychic-type Pokémon arrived from space within meteors, its DNA constantly shifting between forms optimized for attack, defense, speed, or balance. Deoxys seemed to represent evolution taken to its logical extreme, a being whose body could completely restructure itself to match current needs. This made it both fascinating to researchers and dangerous to anything it decided to fight. Some Deoxys specimens appeared peaceful, curious about Earth and its inhabitants. They would observe humans and Pokémon from a distance, studying behaviors without interfering. But other Deoxys displayed aggression, perhaps damaged during atmospheric entry or simply possessing personalities that valued conflict. These violent specimens clashed with Rayquaza, the dragon recognizing them as potential threats to the planet it guarded. The battles between Mega Rayquaza and Deoxys occurred at altitudes where no human could witness them without specialized equipment. Psychic energy clashed against draconic fury in the thin air of the upper atmosphere, creating light shows that occasionally became visible from the ground as strange auroras. These conflicts usually ended with Deoxys fleeing back into space, recognizing that Rayquaza's power in Earth's atmosphere exceeded its own capabilities. Another quiet detail appears when we look closer at the Regi trio and their relationship to Regigigas. The 5 golems represented different aspects of elemental stability. Regirock embodied earth and stone, its body composed of compressed boulders held together through unknown forces. Battles damaged Regirock constantly, pieces of its body breaking away under attacks. But the rock type could repair itself by absorbing nearby rocks, replacing damaged sections with new material. This meant Regirock's body was never quite the same twice, constantly refreshed with stone from whatever region it inhabited. Regisa's body maintained temperatures approaching absolute zero. The ice that formed its structure would never melt, even in volcanic environments or under direct flame. Researchers who studied Regis from a distance noted that air around the ice type condensed into frost, creating a visible sphere of cold that extended several feet from its body. Getting too close to Regis risked flash freezing, moisture in human lungs turning to ice crystals with potentially fatal results. Registeel's body had been forged from metal not found anywhere on Earth. Scientists analyzed samples from battlefields where Registeel had fought, studying the metallic flakes it occasionally shed. The material resisted all attempts at identification, its molecular structure unlike any known element or alloy. This led to theories that Registeel was constructed from meteoric metal, or perhaps from substances that existed during Earth's formation, but no longer occurred naturally. Regieleki represented pure electrical energy given semi-physical form. The electric type's body consisted of electricity contained within a specially designed shell that Regigigas had created to prevent the energy from dissipating. Without this containment, Regieleki would simply cease to exist, its form dissolving into ambient electrical fields. The shell featured yellow patterns that glowed brighter as Regieleki charged, serving as warning indicators of how much power the golem currently held. Regidrago embodied incomplete creation. Regigigas had intended to create a dragon from pure dragon energy, but depleted its power before completing the task. Only Regidrago's head was finished, the rest of its body suggested by crystalline energy that flickered with unrealized potential. Despite this incompleteness, Regidrago possessed immense power, its dragon-type attacks exceeding even the fully formed dragon Pokémon in raw force. The golem seemed frustrated by its unfinished state, attacking with fury that suggested awareness of what it should have been. Regigigas's decision to create these golems in its own image raised questions about the Titan's psychology and purpose. Why did a being capable of moving continents need assistance? The answer seemed to lie in Regigigas's slow start ability, which hindered its strength for several turns after awakening. This suggested that Regigigas spent most of its existence in a dormant state, conserving energy between the rare occasions when its full power was needed. The golems served as guardians and workers who could act when Regigigas slept, maintaining balance in the Titan's absence. The sealing of the Regis 10,000 years ago separated them from their creator. Regigigas was imprisoned in the Snow Point Temple in Sinnoh, while the original 3 golems were scattered across Hoenn and other regions. This separation endured for millennia, the golems continuing their guardianship without direct communication from their maker. When trainers eventually discovered and caught the Regis, they often noted how the golems seemed to be waiting for something, their dot-pattern eyes pulsing with light as if trying to see across vast distances. Reuniting the 3 original Regis in specific locations could summon Regigigas from its slumber, though the Titan remained weakened by slow start upon awakening. This reunion seemed to bring Regigigas satisfaction, as if it had been lonely during its imprisonment. The golem's actions after awakening suggested it wanted to resume its work shaping continents, but modern human civilization made such large-scale geological manipulation impossible without causing catastrophic damage to cities and infrastructure. Sinnoh's creation myths went deeper than other regions' legends because Sinnoh sat at the center of where reality had been shaped. The region's geography reflected this cosmic significance, with Mount Coronet serving as the literal axis around which time and space had been organized. Dialga and Palkia's connection to this mountain ran so deep that attempting to summon them anywhere else resulted in failure or weakened manifestations. Dialga's power over time extended beyond simple control of seconds and minutes. The temporal Pokémon could slow time to near stillness, creating zones where events that should take hours occurred in moments. It could accelerate time in localized areas, causing rapid aging or allowing time-sensitive processes to complete almost instantaneously. Most terrifyingly, Dialga possessed the theoretical ability to reverse time itself, undoing events that had already occurred. This last power remained largely theoretical because Dialga rarely, if ever, used it. Time reversal created paradoxes that threatened the stability of cause and effect, potentially unraveling the universe if used carelessly. Dialga seemed to understand this danger instinctively, reserving its time manipulation for maintaining the proper flow rather than actively rewriting events. The Pokémon served as time's guardian rather than its master, ensuring that seconds progressed in proper sequence and that temporal paradoxes did not tear reality apart. Palkia's spatial abilities matched Dialga's temporal power in scope and danger. The spatial Pokémon could warp space, connecting distant locations through portals that ignored the intervening distance. It could compress space, causing areas that should span miles to contract into rooms. It could expand space, turning small chambers into vast halls that defied external dimensions. These manipulations allowed Palkia to exist in multiple locations simultaneously, its body occupying different points in space that nevertheless remained connected through spatial warping. Palkia's role as space's guardian involved maintaining proper dimensions and ensuring that the universe's geometry remained consistent. Without this maintenance, space might collapse in on itself or expand into infinite void. The spatial Pokemon's existence stabilized reality at a fundamental level, its presence ensuring that distance and position continued to have meaning. Giratina's banishment to the distortion world had been necessary to prevent its antimatter nature from destabilizing the universe Dialga and Palkia maintained. But this banishment came with unexpected consequences. The distortion world served as a release valve for reality, a place where the laws of physics could bend without affecting the normal universe. Giratina's presence there, rather than being pure punishment, became a form of cosmic balance. The renegade Pokémon absorbed disruptions and paradoxes that threatened normal space-time, processing them in the distortion world where their effects could be contained. This made Giratina essential to universal stability despite its violent tendencies. When Cyrus attempted to summon Dialga and Palkia simultaneously, creating stress on the boundary between dimensions, Giratina's response was not random violence, but protective intervention. The renegade Pokémon recognized that Cyrus's actions threatened to tear apart the carefully maintained barrier between worlds, potentially allowing the distortion world's chaos to flood into normal reality. Giratina's two forms reflected its nature as a being between worlds. In altered form, Giratina could exist in the normal universe, but with significantly reduced power. This form resembled a serpent with 6 legs, designed for moving through both ground and air despite its massive size. In origin form, Giratina's true nature emerged, its body elongating into a pure serpent shape, optimized for flying through the distortion world's strange gravity. Origin form was more powerful, but could only be maintained in the distortion world or through use of the Griseous Orb. The Griseous Orb itself was a fragment of antimatter contained within a stable shell, allowing Giratina to access Origin Form's power while in the normal universe. Holding this orb required special containment, as direct contact with the antimatter inside would cause matter to annihilate in bursts of energy. Trainers who obtained the Griseous Orb had to handle it with special equipment, never touching it directly with bare skin. The Lake Guardians, Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf, represented Sinnoh's myths on a more intimate scale than the Cosmic Titans. These 3 Pokémon had been granted consciousness that mirrored human mental capabilities, serving as bridges between legendary power and mortal experience. Uxie knew everything that could be known, its mind containing infinite information accumulated across eons of observation. But this knowledge came with a curse. Uxie's eyes held power that could erase memories from anyone who looked directly at them. The knowledge Pokémon kept its eyes perpetually closed to prevent accidentally wiping the minds of those it encountered. Mesprit embodied all emotions, experiencing joy and sorrow, love and hatred, hope and despair simultaneously. The emotion Pokémon could sense the feelings of others from vast distances, making it extremely difficult to approach. Mesprit fled from trainers who pursued it, not from fear, but because it could feel their desire to capture it, and found this emotion overwhelming. Only trainers whose emotions balanced perfectly, strong enough to persist, but gentle enough not to frighten, could approach Mesprit without causing it to flee. Azelf represented willpower and determination, the force that allowed beings to choose their own path despite external pressure. The Will Pokémon slept at the bottom of Lake Valor, resting until needed. Azelf's awakening brought consequences for the entire region, as its presence strengthened the resolve of all nearby Pokémon and humans. This could manifest as increased courage during crisis, or as stubbornness that refused to compromise even when compromise was wise. Together, The three Lake Guardians formed a trinity that balanced knowledge, emotion, and will, the three components Arceus had deemed essential for conscious life. Their creation had been deliberate, a gift from the original being to all who would follow. By spreading these forces across Sinnoh's lakes, Arceus ensured that no part of the region would lack access to these fundamental mental capabilities. Darkrai and Cresselia represented another duality in Sinnoh's legendary roster, though their relationship was more adversarial than complementary. Darkrai, the Dark-type Pokémon who created nightmares, seemed malevolent at first encounter. Its presence caused people and Pokémon to fall into sleep filled with terrifying dreams, visions so real that victims often woke screaming. But Darkray's nature was more tragic than evil. It caused nightmares involuntarily, unable to control the dark energy it radiated. Darkray's isolation on New Moon Island stemmed from this inability to prevent harm. The pitch-black Pokémon had exiled itself to protect others from its nightmarish aura, choosing loneliness over causing unintentional suffering. Trainers who reached New Moon Island and encountered Darkrai often felt pity rather than fear, recognizing that this powerful being was as much prisoner as guardian of the barren island. Cresselia stood as Darkray's opposite and occasional antagonist. The lunar Pokémon could cure nightmares with its presence, creating pleasant dreams that refreshed sleep and healed psychological trauma. Cresselia's feathers, called lunar wings, retained this power even after falling from its body. A single lunar wing could dispel nightmares and protect against Darkrai's aura, making them precious to anyone suffering from chronic bad dreams. The relationship between Darkrai and Cresselia was not one of pure opposition. In some accounts, Cresselia pursued Darkrai across regions to neutralize its nightmare-causing presence. In other stories, the two Pokémon worked together to maintain balance between dream and nightmare, recognizing that both served psychological purposes. Nightmares warned of dangers and processed trauma, while pleasant dreams provided rest and hope. Neither could be eliminated without consequences to the mental health of all dreaming beings. Shaman represented Sinnoh's connection to gratitude and growth. The gratitude Pokémon migrated seasonally, transforming from land form to sky form when exposed to Gracidia flowers. In land form, Shaman resembled a small hedgehog covered in grass and flowers, its appearance unthreatening and gentle. This form could purify polluted soil simply by walking across it, leaving trails of blooming flowers that indicated Earth restored to health. Sky form emerged when Shaman's power activated fully, the small hedgehog transforming into a sleek flying creature with speed that rivaled even the legendary birds. This form lasted only during daylight and in warm weather, reverting to land form at night or in cold conditions. The transformation represented gratitude's dual nature, sometimes quiet and patient, sometimes soaring and exuberant, depending on circumstances. Shaman's migration route passed through Sinnoh's flower paradise, a hidden location that existed in a dimension slightly separated from normal space. Only those carrying Gracidia flowers and a pure sense of gratitude could access this paradise. The field stretched for miles, filled with flowers that bloomed eternally, despite the lack of visible sun or rain. Shaman rested there between migrations, surrounded by beauty it had helped create through its purification of soil across multiple regions. Arceus's absence from Sinnoh's daily life made its rare appearances all the more significant. The original one manifested only under specific conditions, requiring all 16 type plates to be gathered and brought to the Hall of Origin. This location existed at the peak of Mount Coronet, but slightly outside normal space, accessible only through dimensional warping. Reaching the Hall of Origin required permission from Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, as if the cosmic trio guarded their creator's resting place. When Arceus appeared, its form seemed to contain all types simultaneously. The god Pokemon's body shifted colors subtly, reflecting the 1,000 arms mentioned in ancient texts as patterns of light rather than physical appendages. Arceus's power dwarfed even Dialga and Palkia, a reminder that the beings who shaped the universe were themselves created and thus subordinate to their creator. Trainers who encountered Arceus often described feeling overwhelmed by its presence, as if standing before something that transcended the concept of Pokémon entirely. Arceus fought when challenged, but its attacks seemed almost lazy, as if it was testing the trainer rather than trying to win. Capturing Arceus felt impossible, despite its participation in battle, the god Pokémon remaining in the trainer's team only because it chose to, not because any Pokeball could truly contain a being who created the concept of capture. Arceus's multi-type ability allowed it to change types by holding different plates, each one representing a fundamental force of nature. The Draco plate transformed Arceus into Dragon type. The Fist plate granted Fighting type. The Splash plate converted it to Water type. This flexibility meant Arceus could adapt to any situation, always matching type advantage against opponents while maintaining consistent base power. No single strategy could reliably defeat Arceus because it could become whatever type best countered the strategy being used against it. The creation myth that surrounded Arceus extended beyond Sinnoh to influence how other regions understood their own legendary Pokémon. If Arceus had created the universe, then every legendary being existed as part of its design. Groudon and Kyogre shaped land and sea according to Arceus's plan. Ho-Oh and Lugia served roles Arceus intended. Even Mewtwo, created through human science rather than divine will, existed because Arceus had created the universe where such science could develop. This cosmology suggested that free will operated within boundaries Arceus had established. Beings could choose their actions, but the framework of reality limited what choices were possible. Giratina's violence had been anticipated, which was why the distortion world existed before Giratina needed banishment. Humans would eventually create weapons, like the ultimate weapon in Kalos, so Arceus's design included mechanisms for such weapons to be neutralized. Everything that happened was both chosen by individual actors and encompassed within Arceus's original vision. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we approach the Unova region and its unique place in Pokémon mythology. Unlike other regions, where legendary Pokémon represented natural forces or cosmic principles, Unova's legends centered on truth and ideals. Abstract concepts that nevertheless shaped how beings understood reality and made decisions. The original dragon Pokémon had served twin heroes who founded Unova thousands of years ago. These brothers initially worked together, their combination of truth and ideals creating a society that balanced honesty with aspiration. The dragon Pokémon they shared embodied both values equally, a being of perfect balance between what was and what could be. But as the brothers aged, their philosophies diverged. One came to value truth above all else, the objective reality of situations regardless of how harsh or limiting. The other prioritized ideals, the vision of what should be despite current circumstances. Their conflict grew until it consumed them, neither willing to compromise their fundamental values. The dragon Pokémon, caught between two equally valid but opposing philosophies, split into two beings. Reshiram embodied truth, its white scales and blue eyes representing clarity and honesty. Zekrom embodied ideals, its black scales and red eyes symbolizing vision and ambition. The split devastated Unova, the resulting battle between Reshiram and Zekrom, destroying cities and reshaping the region's geography. The war ended not because one side won, but because both brothers recognized the futility of their conflict. Truth without ideals became cruel, acknowledging only what existed without striving for improvement. Ideals without truth became delusion, pursuing visions disconnected from reality's constraints. Both were necessary, neither could claim absolute correctness. The brothers departed Unova, each accompanied by their respective dragon, leaving behind a region scarred by the consequences of absolute conviction. Reshiram settled into dormancy within the Lightstone, waiting for a hero who valued truth to awaken it. The dragon's fire burned white-hot, so intense it seemed cold rather than warm. Its flames could incinerate anything that contained lies or deception, making Reshiram a terrifying judge of honesty. But Reshiram's power served protection rather than punishment. It burned away falsehood to reveal the truth beneath, however uncomfortable that truth might be. Trainers who awakened Reshiram found themselves subject to its scrutiny. The dragon could sense lies and half-truths, responding with displeasure when its trainer attempted deception. This made Reshiram difficult to command for anyone who relied on strategy that involved misdirection or false presentation. The dragon demanded absolute honesty in all interactions, a requirement that extended beyond battle into how its trainer lived their life. Zekram's dormancy in the Dark Stone paralleled Reshiram's, waiting for a hero who valued ideals strongly enough to awaken the Black Dragon. Zekram's electricity crackled with power that exceeded even legendary electric types like Raikou, each discharge carrying enough amperage to vaporize steel. The dragon's strength lay not just in raw power, but in its ability to inspire others toward greatness, its presence motivating Pokémon and humans to exceed their perceived limitations. Trainers who awakened Zekrom had to demonstrate unwavering commitment to their ideals. The dragon respected vision and ambition, but only when backed by genuine dedication rather than empty words. Zekrom could sense when someone's ideals were performative versus deeply held, rejecting trainers who proclaimed grand visions while taking no action to achieve them. The dragon's electricity responded to determination, growing stronger when its trainer's resolve strengthened. Kyurem represented the empty shell left when the original dragon split. Neither truth nor ideals, Kyurem embodied the absence of both, the hollow space where unity once existed. The boundary Pokemon's ice was cold enough to freeze even fire, its body radiating temperatures that made the surrounding area uninhabitable for most life forms. Kyurem seemed to be in constant pain, incomplete, and searching for a wholeness it dimly remembered but could not fully comprehend. The dragon's frozen body covered scars from the original split, wounds that had never properly healed. Kyurem's cries sounded mournful rather than aggressive, as if it mourned the loss of something it could not quite identify. When Kyurem fought, its attacks carried desperation. A need to prove existence had meaning, despite the incompleteness that defined its being. Ghetsis' fusion of Kyurem with either Reshiram or Zekrom attempted to restore a portion of the original dragon's power, but the fusion was artificial, held together by technology rather than natural unity. Black Kyurem, or White Kyurem, possessed immense strength, combining Kyurem's ice with Zekrom's electricity, or Reshiram's fire. Yet the fusion remained incomplete, a forced merger that could not truly recreate what had been lost. The resulting being fought more effectively than Kyurem alone, but lacked the wholeness that the original dragon had possessed before the split. Separating the fused dragons after battle revealed that the process had caused neither Kyurem nor its partner permanent change. They returned to their individual forms as if the fusion had never occurred, suggesting that true unity required more than physical combination. The original split had been philosophical and spiritual as much as physical, and reversing it would require reconciling truth and ideals on those deeper levels. The sword trio, Cobalion, Terrakion, and Virizion, represented Unova's more earthly legends. These three Pokemon had protected weaker species during an ancient war, shielding them from humans who had weaponized fire against Pokemon habitats. The trio's intervention saved countless lives, but their actions also deepened the divide between humans and Pokemon in Unova's history. Cobalion led with steel resolve, Terrakion charged with rocky determination, and Virizion moved with grass-type grace. Together they became symbols of protection and resistance against oppression. Keldeo joined the sword trio as a student, learning from the three masters how to fight with honor and protect the innocent. The young water type's journey from student to master involved learning the move Secret Sword, a technique that combines special and physical attack properties. Keldeo's resolute form emerged only after mastering this move, its horn solidifying from gaseous energy into crystalline blade. This transformation represented the completion of training and the acceptance of responsibility that came with power. The forces of nature, Tornadus, Thundurus, and Landorus, roamed Unova, causing weather disasters until their destructive behavior drew Landorus's intervention. Tornadus created hurricanes with wind strong enough to level forests. Thundurus generated thunderstorms that struck the same locations repeatedly until fires consumed entire regions. Landorus appeared to mediate between them, using its ground-type power to stabilize the earth damaged by wind and lightning. These three possessed alternate forms, called Therian forms, accessed through the Reveal Glass artifact. Their Therian forms drew inspiration from Asian mythology's sacred beasts, granting them increased power and altered capabilities. Tornadus became a massive bird, whose wings created cyclones. Thundurus transformed into a dragon, whose tail generated perpetual lightning. Landorus took the shape of a tiger, whose claws carved channels in the earth. These forms suggested that the forces of nature had histories extending beyond Unova, perhaps originating in regions far to the west. Meloetta represented Unova's artistic soul, the melody Pokémon, whose songs could calm even the forces of nature's rage. In aria form, Meloetta sang with voice that resonated across miles, its melodies capable of evoking any emotion in listeners. In pirouette form, triggered by learning the move Relic Song, Meloetta transformed into a dancer whose movements generated fighting-type energy. This duality represented how art could manifest through both sound and motion, both equally valid expressions of creativity. Meloetta's connection to music went deeper than performance. The Pokémon could sense musical potential in others, appearing to children who showed promise in composition or singing. Stories from Unova described Meloetta teaching these young musicians secret techniques, sharing knowledge accumulated across centuries of observing human culture develop. But Meloetta vanished from public view after a war centuries ago, traumatized by how humans had weaponized music for propaganda and morale manipulation. The melody Pokemon's rare appearances in modern times suggested it was slowly recovering trust in humanity. Genesect represented the ethical boundary between science and nature violated. This Pokemon had been a bug-type species that lived 300 million years ago, contemporary with Kabutops and Aerodactyl. Fossils of this ancient hunter were discovered by Team Plasma scientists, who saw an opportunity to create the ultimate Pokemon weapon. They resurrected the fossil and immediately began modifying it, replacing organic body parts with mechanical augmentations and installing a Canonehas on its back. The modifications succeeded in creating an incredibly powerful hunter, but at a terrible cost. Genesect no longer resembled its original, Species, cyborg modifications, erasing most of what had made it a natural Pokémon. The cannon could be loaded with different drives that changed its attack typing, making Genesect adaptable to any situation. But this flexibility came with the loss of identity. Genesect was neither fully Pokemon nor fully machine, existing in an uncomfortable liminal space between organic and artificial. Genesect's creation raised questions about scientific ethics that extended beyond Team Plasma's particular cruelty. If researchers could resurrect extinct species, did they have the right to immediately alter them? Did Genesect suffer from awareness that it had been modified so extensively, or did the augmentations erase whatever consciousness the original species possessed? These questions remained unanswered, Genesect itself unable or unwilling to communicate its internal experience. The Kalos region's legendary Pokémon reflected its history of beauty and tragedy in equal measure. Xerneas, the life Pokémon, embodied renewal and vitality, its antlers glowing with rainbow light that could restore life force to dying plants and animals. When Xerneas moved through forests, its presence caused rapid growth, trees sprouting new branches, and flowers blooming out of season. The fairy type's power operated on a scale that could affect entire ecosystems, transforming barren landscapes into thriving wilderness within days. But Xerneas' gift came with a cost that the life Pokémon bore alone. After prolonged use of its power, Xerneas entered a dormant state, transforming into a tree that remained motionless for centuries. During this rest period, the life energy Xerneas had given to others slowly replenished within its crystalline core. The cycle of activity and dormancy had repeated throughout Kalos' history, with Xerneas appearing during times of ecological crisis before retreating into tree form once the immediate danger passed. Trainers who encountered Xerneas during its active periods described feeling overwhelmed by vitality, as if the air itself hummed with life force. Minor wounds had healed spontaneously in Xerneas' presence. Fatigue evaporated. Even emotional pain seemed to ease, the life Pokemon's aura restoring mental health alongside physical well-being. But this intense vitality could become uncomfortable, the body processing renewal faster than the mind could adjust to sudden relief from chronic ailments. Yveltal represented the necessary counterbalance to Xerneas' creation, the destruction. Pokemon embodied endings, its power draining life force from living things and converting that energy into fuel for its own existence. When Yveltal spread its wings, the shadow it cast caused plants to wither and animals to weaken. Extended exposure proved fatal, the dark type's presence slowly extracting the life that Xerneas granted so freely. Yet Yveltal's destruction served purpose beyond simple opposition. Death cleared space for new growth, removing the old and sick to allow resources for the young and healthy. Yveltal's hunting prevented overpopulation that would have led to mass starvation. The destruction Pokémon was not evil, but necessary, a force of nature that maintained balance through selective culling. Like Xerneas, Yveltal entered dormancy after prolonged activity, transforming into a cocoon that would remain sealed for centuries while its power recovered. The relationship between Xerneas and Yveltal mirrored the cycle of seasons and the rhythm of birth and death that defined all ecosystems. Neither could exist without the other. Eternal life would lead to stagnation and overcrowding, while eternal death would result in barren emptiness. Together they maintained the balance that allowed Kalos' rich biodiversity to flourish, each taking turns to ensure neither creation nor destruction dominated permanently. Zygarde served as guardian of this balance, watching for signs that Xerneas or Yveltal had become too active. The Order Pokémon existed as a distributed consciousness across multiple cell-like components scattered throughout Kalos. These cells could combine into different forms, depending on how many gathered. At 10% completion, Zygarde resembled a small dog, fast and agile but limited in power. At 50%, it took the form of a massive serpent, balanced between mobility and strength. At complete 100% assembly, Zygarde transformed into a towering humanoid form whose power rivaled even Xerneas and Yveltal. Zygarde's cells operated independently most of the time, observing the ecosystem without it interfering. Only when the balance between life and death tilted dangerously did the cells begin gathering, combining into progressively larger forms as the threat escalated. This distributed existence made Zygarde nearly impossible to eliminate completely. Destroying one form simply caused the cells to scatter and begin rebuilding elsewhere. The Order Pokémon was patient and persistent, willing to spend centuries monitoring before taking action. Diancie represented a mutation of Carbink, the small rock-type Pokémon who formed naturally in caves throughout Kalos. Most Carbink lived simple lives, absorbing minerals from their surroundings and slowly growing more pure in composition. But once every several thousand years, a Carbink was born with the potential to become Diancie, the jewel Pokémon whose body could create diamonds from carbon in the air. This transformation occurred spontaneously under unknown conditions, possibly triggered by specific mineral compositions in the cave where the Carbink formed. Diancie's ability to create diamonds made it precious to humans who valued gemstones for their beauty and rarity. But the jewel Pokémon viewed its creations differently, as expressions of light and color, rather than objects of monetary worth. Diancie could mega-evolve, transforming into a form where diamond armor covered its body and increased both its defensive and offensive capabilities. Mega Diancie's diamonds were harder than any natural gemstone, capable of cutting through steel as if it were paper. The Carbink, who lived in the caves where Diancie ruled, treated the jewel Pokémon as royalty, protecting it from threats and harvesting the diamonds it created to decorate their underground kingdom. This society of rock types operated entirely separate from human civilization, following social structures developed over millions of years. Diancie's role involved not just creating diamonds, but mediating disputes between Carbink groups and making decisions about the colony's future. Leadership weighed heavily on the young Pokémon, who had to balance an instinct with responsibility in ways most legendary Pokémon never faced. Hoopa brought spatial manipulation to Kalos through its ability to create rings that connected distant locations. The Mischief Pokemon's power resembled Palkia's spatial warping, but on a smaller, more controlled scale. Hoopa could summon objects or beings through these rings, retrieving items from across regions or bringing people to its location without their consent. This ability made Hoopa incredibly useful when it chose to cooperate, but the Pokemon's mischievous nature meant cooperation was never guaranteed. Hoopa's alternate form, Hoopa Unbound, emerged when the prison bottle that contained its power was opened. This transformation revealed that Hoopa's true nature, a being of immense strength, whose spatial abilities extended to dragging even other legendary Pokemon through its rings. Hoopa Unbound could summon multiple legendaries simultaneously, surrounding itself with borrowed power. But this form was difficult to control, Hoopa's mischievousness amplifying into destructive rampages that threatened entire cities. The decision to seal Hoopa's power in the prison bottle had been made by ancient people who recognized that Hoopa Unbound's rampages endangered everyone nearby. The bottle limited Hoopa to its smaller form, reducing its power, but also its tendency toward harmful mischief. Hoopa seemed content with this limitation most of the time, treating the prison bottle as a necessary restriction rather than unjust punishment. The mischief. Pokémon had caused enough destruction in its past to understand why humans feared its unbound form. Vulcanian represented Kalos's connection to steam and the Industrial Revolution that had reshaped the region centuries ago. The steam Pokemon's body generated heat intense enough to boil water instantaneously, creating pressure that it expelled through arm-mounted cannons. These steam bursts could destroy mountains or create clouds that generated rainfall across drought-stricken areas. Volcanian's dual fire and water typing made it unique among legendary Pokemon, embodying the transformation that occurred when these opposing elements met under pressure. The Pokemon's relationship with humans had been complicated by industrial development. Volcanian's steam was natural and clean, powered by internal heat rather than burning fossil fuels. But human steam engines produced pollution that Volcanian found offensive, contaminating air and water with byproducts of combustion. The steam Pokemon had retreated from human civilization as industry expanded, taking refuge in remote valleys where it could generate steam without witnessing how humans had corrupted the principle. Volcanian's appearances in modern times suggested it was monitoring human technological development, watching to see if clean energy would eventually replace the polluting methods that had driven it away. The Pokemon seemed willing to help humans who demonstrated respect for environmental balance, using its steam to power facilities or clear blockages from rivers. But Volcanion maintained distance, unwilling to fully trust that humans had learned from past mistakes. Another quiet detail appears when we look closer at Alola's island guardians and their relationship to the region's culture. Tapu Koko protected Melemele Island with electric and fairy typing, its speed unmatched among the guardian deities. The land spirit Pokemon could move faster than sight could track, appearing and disappearing in bursts of electricity. Tapu Koko tested trainers it found interesting, challenging them to battle without warning to assess their strength and character. These tests felt random, but followed patterns that Tapu Koko understood even if humans did not. Tapu Lele guarded Akala Island with psychic and fairy abilities, its presence creating scales of glowing energy that it scattered across the island. These scales carried healing power, but also posed danger. Absorbing too much of Tapu Lele's energy could drive humans or Pokemon temporarily insane, their minds unable to process the overload of psychic force. The land spirit Pokemon seemed unaware or unconcerned about this side effect, distributing scales according to some internal logic that did not account for recipients' capacity to handle the power. Tapu Bulu's protection of Ula Ula Island involved grass and fairy typing, the guardian deity using wooden horns to channel natural energy. Unlike the other Tapus, Bulu preferred to avoid conflict when possible, only emerging when threats directly endangered the island. The land spirit Pokemon's laziness was legendary among Alolens, who told stories of Tapu Bulu sleeping through entire seasons before waking to deal with accumulated problems all at once. Yet when Bulu fought, its power matched or exceeded its more active siblings, proving that its tendency toward rest did not indicate weakness. Tapu Fini guarded Pony Island with water and fairy typing, creating purifying mist that could wash away toxins from land and sea. The land spirit Pokemon tested humans by creating fog so thick that travelers became hopelessly lost, wandering in circles until Tapu Fini decided whether they were worthy of passage. Those who failed the test found themselves deposited back at Pony Island's edge, with no memory of their attempted crossing. Those who succeeded often could not explain what they had done to earn Tapu Fini's approval, the criteria remaining mysterious even to those who passed. The island guardians' shells served as both armor and power limiters, containing their full strength until circumstances required its release. When a Tapu closed its shell, it became nearly invulnerable, attacks bouncing off the protective casing without causing damage. But maintaining this defense prevented the Guardian from using its full abilities, creating a choice between protection and power. Most threats did not require the Guardians to open their shells fully, suggesting that their sealed forms contained strength sufficient for ordinary challenges. Alola's relationship with Ultra Beasts added complexity to the region's mythology. These beings from other dimensions occasionally appeared through Ultra wormholes, bringing with them abilities and behaviors that did not match normal Pokémon patterns. Nihilego resembled a jellyfish made of glass, its body composed of neurotoxins that could possess other beings and amplify their worst personality traits. The Pokemon's intelligence remained unclear. It might have been sapient, or might have operated on pure instinct, its possession of other beings an unconscious response to environmental stress. Buzzwole exhibited extreme muscular development, its body constantly flexing and displaying strength through poses. The swollen Pokémon seemed obsessed with power and physical dominance, challenging anything it encountered to tests of strength. Buzzwole's attacks relied entirely on overwhelming force, punching and kicking with power that could shatter buildings. Yet despite this focus on physicality, Buzzwole displayed surprising gentleness toward beings it did not perceive as threats, carefully avoiding crushing smaller Pokémon when it moved. Pheromosa contrasted Buzzwole's bulky power with speed and grace. The Lissum Pokémon moved so quickly that it seemed to teleport, appearing in multiple locations almost simultaneously. Pheromosa displayed fastidiousness about cleanliness that bordered on obsession, refusing to touch things it considered dirty. This made battles frustrating for the Pokémon, as combat inevitably involved contact with earth, water, or other substances Pheromosa found distasteful. The Ultra Beast fought efficiently to minimize exposure to filth, rather than from any desire for victory itself. Circuitry's body consisted of pure electrical cable, its form able to reshape into different configurations depending on power requirements. The glowing Pokémon could plug into electrical systems and drain them completely, growing larger and brighter as it absorbed more energy. Circuitry seemed fascinated by electricity in all its forms, investigating power plants and electrical Pokémon with apparent curiosity. Whether this interest indicated intelligence or just natural attraction to its food source remained debated among researchers. Celesteela resembled a bamboo shoot crossed with a rocket, its body designed for space travel despite being classified as a Pokémon. The launch Pokémon could generate thrust powerful enough to escape planetary gravity, suggesting it or its species had evolved in environments where space travel was necessary for survival. Celesteela's presence in Alola seemed almost accidental, as if it had landed there during a longer journey and become stranded when unable to refuel. Kartana's body consisted of razor-sharp, paper-thin material that could cut through solid steel. The drawn sword Pokémon moved with precision that suggested martial arts training, its attacks following forms and patterns that resembled swordsmanship. Kartana's two-dimensional nature allowed it to slip through gaps impossibly small for its apparent size, making it extremely difficult to contain or trap. The Ultra Beast displayed aggression toward anything that threatened it, but also curiosity about Alola's plant life, occasionally stopping mid-battle to examine interesting foliage. Guzzlord embodied consumption taken to its logical extreme. The Junkivore Pokémon possessed a stomach that seemed to have infinite capacity, eating everything it encountered without ever appearing satisfied. Guzzlord's appearance in an alternate future, where it had consumed an entire city, suggested what would happen if the Ultra Beast remained in one location too long, total annihilation of all matter until nothing remained but Guzzlord itself. Yet the Pokémon displayed no malice. eating not from cruelty, but from insatiable hunger it could not control. Necrozma's relationship to light went deeper than simple preference or need. The Prism Pokémon had originally been a being of pure light, illuminating an entire dimension called Ultra Megalopolis. But something had damaged Necrozma, causing it to lose the ability to generate light internally. Now it existed in constant pain, desperately seeking light sources to absorb in an attempt to restore what it had lost. This made Necrozma dangerous and pitiable simultaneously, a being driven to harmful actions by suffering rather than evil intent. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed drifting through these quiet moments, there's another video waiting on the left of your screen. Let it play while you rest. You might discover something gentle before sleep takes you again.